Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Aubrey.
And this is Wine, Women, and Crafts.
Boom, boom, wine, women, and crafts.
Pardon our dust, there's a little construction going on in the background. We apologize for any noise that gets through.
Yes. But anyways, welcome to our Hanukkah episode. We are very excited to celebrate this with our friends. Why did we decide to do this?
We are not Jewish, but we have a lot of Jewish friends, and we want to make sure they feel included in this holiday season and our episodes.
So for our episode today, I will be showing you how to do... Oh, hello. I will be showing you...
Boom, wine, women, and...
For today, I am showing you how to make a quilt block that I will then arrange into a table runner.
And I'm going to be showing you how to make a dreidel out of Sculpey. Because ever since I was a kid, I've heard dreidel, dreidel, dreidel. I made it out of clay.
Yes.
And
Leo is doing a guest appearance because he needs friends.
he needs attention.
Yes.
But first,
The wine review. This week we are trying a wonderful bottle that was donated by my Aunt Lisa. So thank you, Auntie. We love donated wine.
Yes, please,
Yes.
send more.
Yes, we like this. This is Quinta das Carvelas. Forgive me if I mispronounced it, but Quinta das Carvelas. This is one of the oldest quintas in the Douro Valley, as well as one of the best located. Written references about Quinta das Carvelas, describing its prominent position on the left bank of the Douro River, can be traced back to 1759.
Wow, old wine.
But this is a bottle from 2015. It also says it is a Porto.
Ooh, port. Port is good stuff, but that is some heavy liquor. Make sure that you only give us like a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
You still got to be able to craft.
Yes. So, just a little bit.
The thing about
That
port... You're funny.
Little more.
Yes. The thing about port is you usually want to pair it with something that'll stand up really well. Blue cheese, oddly enough, is a really good one. It's also considered a dessert wine, so sometimes with things that are a little bit sweeter, work well as well. So, the swish. Wiggle, wiggle,
Or wiggle, wiggle. As I do it.
All right.
The looking.
Yes. And this one will have thicker legs because of the amount of sugar that's in it. Port actually came from Portugal originally because of the trade routes. They made a more sugary wine that wouldn't go bad in the ships as it would get up to England. And so that's why it has the name Porto and why it's a sweeter wine, because they still wanted to be able to get into the English market. Just a fun history lesson.
Oh, that is smooth.
Mm-hmm. It's
That's good.
really easy to drink too much port.
I can tell.
It's good stuff.
All right. Well, what is your rating, my dear?
Oh, I like this. I tend to like Sandman just a little bit better, but this is really good.
This is really good.
I'm going to say 4.5.
Sure, I'll match you. 4.5. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. And I'm going to put this down now. And we are going to start crafting. Alrighty, steps for making a quilt block that then we rearrange into a table runner. Step 1, gather your materials. You need 3 different fabrics that go well together, each of them a ½ yard. You also need a backing fabric, binding. I use the pre-made bias strips, and batting, the thread, scissors, and all of your usual sewing machine goodness. Step 2, you're going to cut your 3 fabrics into 4-inch wide strips. 3, pair up and sew the strips. So pair up each of those strips with a different fabric and sew along the long sides. Step 3.5, iron those seams so that it all lays flat. Step 4 is to cut the strips. First, cut the selvage off the edge, and then measure out 7.5 inches to make a square. Yes, these strips create 7.5-inch squares. I know, it's a weird number. Step 5, cut those squares along the 45-degree angles. So now you have 2 triangles for each square. Step 6, lay out all of your squares and then mix up all the triangles. What I try to do is make sure that my fabrics don't match along those seams, so that I don't have like fabric A next to fabric A, but that they're all jumbled up. Step 7 is to sew those triangles back together into squares. Match up the corners opposite that seam so that your seam allowance has the wiggle room to make it into a true square as opposed to something a little hinky. Step 7.5. Iron those resewn squares so they stay flat. Step 8, arrange those squares into a table runner, or a placemat, or even a quilt. Whatever you want to do, this is the quilt block that then you choose your shape. Step 9, sew all the squares together to form the completed top. You can do this along all of the horizontal seams or along the vertical seam, however you want to do it, just sew all the squares together. Step 10 is to cut your batting and your backing to size and leave about at least an inch, if not 2 inches of excess around your top. Step 10.5, pin all 3 of those layers together. Step 11 is to sew the layers together. I do sew in the ditch for my quilting, so that means I just make a nice grid and sew along the edges of the squares. You can do whatever design you want to, but sewing in the ditch along those seams is the easiest. Step 12 is to add the binding. Put the open edge or the raw edge of your binding along the top edge, pin that first side in place, and then start sewing with as small a seam allowance as you can. Once you have done that first edge, stop about 1/4 of an inch before you reach the corner, and then turn your whole piece as you fold that binding over to keep the open edge on the top edge of your quilt. And keep on sewing. You can go all the way around and do some back stitching once you reach the overlap part. Step 13, we're almost there, I swear. Step 13 is to trim all of the excess batting. So it is just your table runner. Just trim that excess batting, all of the excess backing, any excess binding you have, trim it all away. Step 14 is to turn your binding over from the front side to the back side, and then sewing along that edge so complete your binding. And the very final part is to trim the threads, lay it out, and admire your work. Good job.
Thank you for joining me on my very first try at making a dreidel. I've heard the song since I was a kid of dreidel, 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 I made it out of clay. So I decided I was gonna make one this year. This project, I am using Sculpey instead of traditional ceramic clay because the ceramic clay, I'd have to wait for it to dry, then I'd have to fire it into bisque, then I'd have to paint the bisque and fire it again. And each time you fire it, it's usually about 24 hours before it can come back out of the kiln and be cooled properly. So there just wasn't quite enough time to do all that. So instead, I'm using Sculpey. Plus, Sculpey is a lot easier to get a hold of in your local craft store and a lot easier to bake because you can just do it at home. So first you want to get your Sculpey together. I chose 2 tones of blue, but you can choose any color you want. You can make it a solid single color and then just paint over the top of it, which if you're really into crisp lines is probably the better way to go. You'll see why at the end of the project when I start to paint on it. You'll also need some paint brushes, a rolling pin. In this case, the rolling pin didn't come into that much of play, but I was using some paint stirrers as my hard edges so that I can create those hard edges. Once you've got all of your pieces assembled, you're going to start working that Sculpey. Now, Sculpey has a tendency to be a little stiff when you start working with it, but the more you move it into your hands and warm it up, the more pliable it becomes. So really work it into your hands and get a good solid ball before you start trying to form it. Once you have your solid ball, you want to start shaping it into a bit of a square. It's okay if it's not a perfect square, you just want the outside edges to be square. The top and bottom, you can play with a little bit more. Now, what I did with the top and bottom is that for the bottom, I took it and sandwiched it at a 45-degree angle or so between the side where the cymbal will be and the bottom point. That 45-degree angle, especially when it's this heavy, will allow it to spin. The shorter it is, the easier it'll be to spin. The taller it is, the less likely it is that you're going to get the weight just right to have it spin for a really long time. But if you go with the larger side, then you have a larger paint area to put your cymbals on. After you have sort of formed that 45-degree angle for each of the points and then sort of shoved that point into the sides, that will give you the basic shape of what you want your dreidel to look like. Once your dreidel is mostly formed, I went to the top of it and started using my knife to sort of cut that back. I didn't attach a separate piece because it would have been super obvious, but by taking the knife and sort of cutting away to where I knew I wanted the top to spin, I was able to make it out of that same contiguous piece of clay and not have the seam that you would have if you tried to attach a separate piece. You can also use tools to sort of smooth that edge, but it doesn't always translate. Once you have the basic form down, I went ahead and put the other color of clay as little tiles on each side to be painted later. I got kind of mixed results on this, which is why I decided to paint it at the very end. Because when you go back and you cut it, this would have been different if I had done them as panels and then tried to attach them, but it just didn't quite come out the way that I was expecting it to, so I ended up covering that up with paint. You want to measure how thick your dreidel actually is so that you make sure to have it in the oven for the correct amount of time. In my case, it was about an inch, maybe a little over than that. So I did about 4 times your regular time. So it had to be in there for about an hour. But you don't want to go too far beyond that because you'll see that I had cracking on one side. What you could do to prevent the cracking is turn it partway through. Make sure you're using an oven-safe glove. Do not burn yourself on this project. It's just not worth it. But you want to let it cool naturally. Don't try to put it in ice. That'll cause cracking, or try to do anything to make it cool down any faster than it naturally would. After you've pulled your dreidel out of the oven and it's all nice and cool, you're going to go ahead and decide how you want to paint it. For me, I decided to paint that entire middle section with a cobalt blue. Tried a different color first, it just didn't quite go very well. The paint was too dried out. So I used a cobalt blue, and I just kind of made sure that all of my lines were nice and straight, and then I copied down the symbols for the actual game. I freehanded the symbols on my dreidel, but if that's not your forte, you can print out the symbols and use them as a template. If you use a knife or a pin to sort of put them in, you can use that as a guide. Or you can just use tracing paper. There's a type of tracing paper where it's red on one side and sort of plain on the other. Put the red side down and trace over, and it'll just transfer on there and you can paint over it. Otherwise, if you can freehand, I would, because there's no residue, but it's really up to you. It's your project. If you're looking for instructions on how to play with your dreidel, here's a helpful website that a friend referred me to. Go ahead and check it out and have fun playing with your dreidel. Happy Hanukkah!
Welcome back. We have shown you how to make our wonderful crafts today. I showed you how to do a table runner out of a quilt block. So fun and sparkly. And Miss Aubrey,
I showed you how to make a dreidel out of clay.
That was fun. So anyways, thank you for joining us on our 5th episode. Please remember to join us in a couple of weeks on our 6th episode, the Christmas episode. It's going to be fun and exciting.
If you have projects for us, put them in the comments. And we would love to see if you did your own tasting, what you thought of the wine, your crafts if you made them, all that fun stuff.
So hit like and subscribe. Tell us in the comments. We'll see you next time.
Boom, boom, wine, women and crafts.